Hello, everyone. It is great to be here this evening. My name is Joy Johnson, and I'm the president of Simon Fraser University. And I want to welcome all of you here this evening, both online and in person. I want to begin tonight's event in a good way. And Elder Margaret was to be here tonight, but she was unable to make the connection. So it's my privilege to begin in the appropriate way by acknowledging the land that we're on. We are on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. And I do want to pay my respects to elders past and present. I think it's really appropriate, given the topic as well, as we think about food security, to also be thinking about the land and the unceded territories that we have the privilege to work and play and live on. So with that, I want to welcome you all here this evening. It's really a pleasure to be here for the President's Faculty Lecture. And we're doing this, we'll be welcoming Dr. Tamara Soma, who's going to address the topic of setting the table for food justice, the role of community engaged research. And I'm really looking forward to tonight's lecture. As many of you know, the President's Faculty Lecture is really a part of the SFU Public Square, and it's a signature initiative of our vision to be Canada's engaged university. By providing opportunities to hear from people like Professor Soma on topics that really are timely, we have an opportunity to really enlighten and promote dialogue on important issues of our time. This is a series of 6 lectures, and it's exploring the themes of equity and justice from a variety of disciplines. It really is a fitting topic for our time, I think we can all agree. And I'm really looking forward to us all engaging in this topic together. I cannot be happier to see a live audience this evening. So I am really tired of Zoom, I've got to tell you. So it is so great to have a live audience this evening. We are also broadcasting, so I want to welcome those of you who are joining us on Zoom as well. It's great to have you here with us as well. We're broadcasting live from the David Mofagian World Arts Center at Simon Fraser University's Woodwards in downtown Vancouver. And I want to thank the technical team at the back. You always do such a fabulous job. This is the technical team for SFU Woodwards, and I really am so appreciative of all the work that you do to make us look good and sound even better. We're excited to have an in-person audience this evening, as I mentioned, and this is the first time. I've been president for about 17 months now, and this is the first time really we've had a live audience like this, and we're trying something new. It's a hybrid event, so as I said, we've got people online and also in person, so we're kind of experimenting. We'd love your feedback on how this goes for all of you as well. For those of you who are on Zoom right now, I'm going to encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. Please feel free to use the chat to let everyone else know on Zoom where you're coming from. We've had in the past people joining us from across Canada and beyond, and that's always really exciting for us to learn about. There's going to be a chance for all of you to participate and raise questions and offer comments at the lecture, and I will encourage those of you on Zoom to do so. For our Q&A tonight, though, we're going to be asking questions both online and we're going to have some in-person audience members as well using an app called Slido. Okay, hands up in the audience. I know you can't do this online. How many of you have used Slido before? Some of you have. Okay, that's good. Slido is a site that you can easily access on your phones. So you get to pull your phone out. Or you can do it on your computer. You don't need to sign up for an account. You don't need to download an app. All you do is go to the site, and the site is sli.do. And we've got some information here. It's in your web browser. You just put sli.do and up will come the site. And you're going to be asked for a 6-digit code. And the 6-digit code is 151020. So using this app, you can submit your questions, but you can also upvote other people's questions as well. And so if there's a question you really want answered that someone else has already posed, you can move it up the queue. So I'm going to ask you to use Slido this evening for our Q&A. And if anyone in the audience tonight is having trouble with the Slido, I'm sorry I cannot help with those of you online, but those of you in the audience, if you're having any trouble, put your hand up and someone will provide you with a little bit of assistance. We do have community guidelines on how we engage with one another, and it really is about being respectful for one another. And we're posting those in the chat for those who are online. As has been mentioned, tonight's lecture is also being recorded, and you can watch this again on our SFU Public Square website and on our YouTube channel. So now I'm going to move on to the main business of this evening, and that is to introduce our guest speaker. But before I do, I just want to comment that BC has been through a pretty tough time lately. And I want to publicly say that I really am feeling for the citizens of our province. I know in particular, people in particular sites are struggling with the floods, struggling with the slides, struggling with their loss of livelihood. And given that, I cannot think of a better and more timely topic than the one we have this evening. With the floods, and I'm sure Dr. Soma will be talking about this evening, I think that we're all asking questions about our food supply. Last week we were all hearing about many issues related to food supply. We're hearing issues about the sustainability of our farm systems. And I think we all need to begin to be thinking anew about this very important topic. So to help us with our thinking this evening, I'm so pleased that we have Tamara Soma joining us. Tamara is an assistant professor at SFU School of Resource and Environmental Management and a research director of SFU's Food Systems Lab. The Canadian Organic Growers named the Food Systems Lab one of 4 women-run projects that are redefining agriculture. Just so proud of that recognition. I think it's wonderful. So originally hailing from Indonesia, Professor Soma conducts research on issues pertaining to food systems, planning, and the circular economy. She's a co-editor of the Rutledge Handbook on Food Waste and was selected as a committee member of the U.S. National Academies of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine for the Consensus Study, a national strategy to reduce food waste at the consumer level. So we're so excited to hear her presentation this evening, setting the table for food justice, the role of community engaged research. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tamara Soma.
Hey, oh my goodness, thank you so much, Joy, and greetings to all my relations. Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you. I'm so grateful to be here on this territory, the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. Tonight, I will be your host, and I've set what I hope will be a beautiful table full of hope and solutions. I'm at your service, so do make sure that you feel comfortable, whether you are here in person or at home in the comfort of your own bed or sofa. So Dr. Johnson and organizers, thank you so much for inviting me to the table, for welcoming me, for making me feel like I belong at SFU. When I did my job interview at SFU, I was asked, what does planning mean to you? Instead of going with the definition offered by the Canadian Institute of Planner, which is very long, I took a risk and said, for me, planning, and especially food system planning, it's about creating places and spaces where people feel that they belong. So this is why today our table for food justice will be very wide, very long. The circle will be very big, because all of you, all of us belong and need to be part of this conversation. So today I am here in full acknowledgement of the tragedy and suffering faced by many of our neighbors, friends, families, students, colleagues, and fellow BC residents impacted by the BC storm. We also recognize the suffering faced by farmers, migrant farm workers, the animals, and particularly for those of us who are just learning, myself included, the history of the unjust displacement of the Sumas First Nation from their ancestral territory and what was once a thriving lake and ecosystem. As Chief Dalton Silver of the Sumas Nation noted in his TV interview, the Sumas lake that was drained 100 years ago is what is now Sumas Valley was their grocery store. It had all types of salmon and food to sustain the nation. So today, my talk will touch upon several principles that feed into food justice, indigenous food sovereignty, food system resiliency, and the right to food. For far too long, we have been complacent in Canada and have accepted the status quo of a two-tiered food system, a system where some of us can choose and obtain food with dignity, while others are left entrenched in a system where their access to food is based on the vagaries of donations and unwanted foods from the market. If many donations are based on corporate surplus food, then what happens, as you can see in this picture, when those stores go empty? So at the SFU's Food Systems Lab, we are in the business of solving complex food systems problem and serving the community through a lens of justice. We take our role as researchers, teachers, students, facilitators, and community engaged scholars very, very seriously. And we feel very privileged to be able to do food work on this beautiful territory and around the world. And by the way, I think you probably have noticed that I've been saying food systems a lot. So as a food systems planner, my realm of work covers the food system, which is the chain of activities connecting food production, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste management, as well as all of the associated regulatory institution and activities. But in addition to this definition, I would like to add that food system also includes the natural ecosystem, the land, the trees, the oceans, the plant, water, animal relations, and maybe even one day in outer space. Have you seen those pictures of astronauts growing food in the space station? Yes, very cool. And for others, food system also include language and culture and spirituality. So when we speak of food justice, I'm really covering all of that. And so you probably understand why the table needs to be very, very big. Okay. And so the reason why we need to set the table in a good way and perhaps even reset the table is because policy interventions and solutions to address food-related issues often disregard the people who matters the most, the people who bear the impact from certain policies or interventions. For example, in trying to address hunger, we deal with food insecurity through food aids, without looking at deeper issues like the lack of affordable housing or the lack of a livable wage. So I believe that how the problem is framed and how the solutions are developed require that we constantly consider who needs to be heard. And then after that, we need to do our very best to break the barriers that might hinder their participation. And this is so important in my work as a planner because justice is the foundation of a sustainable food system, without which sustainability efforts would just remain greenwashing or worse, create negative unintended consequences. And at SFU, so many of us deeply care about sustainability. We have a great sustainability office. We have climate initiatives, waste reduction initiatives, and food initiatives led by students, staff, and faculty. And all sustainability work should be based on the foundation of justice. So planning scholar Dr. Jillian Agiman noted that a truly sustainable society is one where wider questions of social needs and welfare and economic opportunity are integrated with environmental boundaries. So the thing is also we need to be important to be cautious not to approach developing sustainable food systems by only imposing one type of worldview on what it means to be sustainable. Hence, as you can see from the book, just sustainabilities, plural. And so there is a plurality, that's a hard word to say, plurality of sustainabilities beyond Eurocentric scholarship that can contribute to the conversation. And for those of you new to food justice, many of you probably are not, this area of scholarship and also activism covers a diverse array of issues. For example, food justice includes analyzing the power dynamic in food system and agricultural practices. Here at SFU, great work to address migrant farm workers' rights has been done by newly hired SFU labor professor, Dr. Evelyn and Coletta Gress. And food justice also addresses issues around disparities in access. A lot of work on access to food in the downtown East Side has been done by geography professors, Dr. Eugene McCann and Dr. Christiana Maywald. And we also have decolonization work done by amazing professors at SFU like Dr. Cliff Atleo and Dr. Chelsea Armstrong, and many, many more. And more recently, so excited about this, at the Food Systems Lab, we have been working in the realm of digital agriculture to ensure that technological innovations are done in a responsible and ethical manner. But food justice is not just about people. As Dr. Zoe Todd, also famously known on Twitter, you probably know this, as Dr. Fish philosopher, we should also think about the more than human rights. So in a nutshell, we have many community engaged, interdisciplinary, justice-oriented scholars ready to serve the public. Okay, getting to the good stuff. Now, if you read the abstract of the talk when you registered, you would have probably read a little mention on Islamic teachings and food justice. And you may be wondering, what does Islam have to do with food justice? Actually, a journalist asked me that exact question. Why Islam? And I just love that question because it was clear to me that what I will discuss today will likely be new information. And so at least you won't find it boring. And that's because many people don't know very much about Islam, nor is it common in Canada to have a visibly Muslim professor. And I think I can count hijabi professors across Canada maybe in one hand. And so this means that I have a great opportunity to situate myself and give you a glimpse of what Islam has to say about food justice. And you know what? Worldview matters. Anthropologists and sociologists have established the importance of situating oneself. And any social scientist and natural scientist worth their reputation will recognize that worldviews matter because how one sees the world will shape how a technology is mobilized and how a policy is developed. And in community engaged research, which I do, you often bring your all of you, literally your heart on my sleeve. My heart is on my sleeve. So in community engaged research, like it or not, my identity matters. It often matters to the communities and the partners who open their hearts, their doors, and their space. They have to trust me as a researcher. They need to know that I will be accountable. But since I've only been here actually in BC for 3 years, I may be a stranger to most of you or to them. And so in sharing a bit of me today, and to those of you in the room and those of you listening at home, I hope that and I strive to be a good relation and earn the privilege of earning your trust in doing food work together. So this is what I learned when situating yourself. One is usually asked, where are you from? Now in this picture, you will see the lovely Burnaby Mountain. Okay, you're like, no, that's not true. I'm just kidding. These are volcanoes that dot the landscape of my home in Indonesia, located in the Ring of Fire. Does that sound fun? Yes. So no wonder I feel much safer back up at Burnaby Mountain because the bears and the coyotes, no problem. At least I don't have to worry about lava. But jokes aside, I come from an archipelago of 17,000 islands, thousands of ethnicities and tribes, thousands of languages, and diversity and plurality, I got that right, are ingrained in my blood and in our motto of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which is unity in diversity. And I respect it, I appreciate it, I learn from it. And rice is my identity, unlike poutine, which is also tasty. But in a bowl of rice, sorry, poutine is really tasty, but rice for me. So in a bowl of rice, I can see my culture, the rice paddy, the farmers, the folktales, and the traditions that have made me who I am today. And to be a food justice scholar and practitioner, one should always credit the heroes and mentors and teachers that come your way. And I have many, many teachers, but I would like to frame my talk on food justice today through the teachings of these 6 heroes of mine. The late Dr. Wayne Roberts, who constantly showcased the power of food as a lever for awesomeness. And Dr. Aaron Mills, who first taught me the concept of all my relations. Melanie Goodchild, who taught me that food is medicine. Dr. Marie Wilson, a mentor of the Food Systems Lab, who taught us to center the survivors at the heart of the story. And Belinda Lee, my research partner in Everything Good, who taught me about ethical social innovation. And finally, the great teacher of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whose true teachings empowered female scholars like me since 610 AD. And so before we discuss the findings from our study, I would like to discuss a few key pillars in the fight for food justice. So let's do that first. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, we cannot continue to have a two-tiered food system. It's just not acceptable. And we cannot keep on treating food as if it's simply a commodity without considering that food is a human right. And Canada is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the right to food is spelled out in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which, by the way, Canada signed in 1976. The right to food is defined as the following. The right to adequate food is realized when every man, woman, and child, alone or in community with others, has physical and economic access at all times to adequate food or means for its procurement. And we can all see that as it pertains to securing the right to food, Canada has failed. So in the teachings of Islam, the right to food was always a major preoccupation of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who lived in an extremely unequal society in the 7th century. He taught us that one is not a believer. One is not a believer who fills their stomach while their neighbor go hungry. And this teaching informed his companions. So when the Caliph Umar, the 3rd Caliph of Islam, found that a woman and her children were going hungry under his watch, he ran straight to the granary and carried a sack of food for them on his back. When his assistant offered to carry the sack of food for him, the Caliph Umar, sobbing in tears, said, "You will not carry my burden and my sin on the day of judgment." He knows that a leader is responsible for the welfare of his people. And this teaching is informed by the Prophet's own suffering. He rarely had enough food, so much so that he used to tie a stone to his stomach to help alleviate that hunger pang. And this is why also Muslims who are of age and who are of good health are asked to fast during the month of Ramadan, no food, no water for 30 days from dusk to dawn, and to increase our efforts to provide food for those in need. But standing for food justice cannot just be done through individual means and charity from good and kind-hearted people and volunteers. And the Prophet knew that. Yes, we should do our best to be charitable, help our neighbors and others. But standing up for food justice is also about better regulations, global economic justice, land and wealth redistribution. How else can we address the growing inequality without better accountability? How is it just for billionaires to evade taxes, legally, may I add, and profit from people suffering? And how is it that policy and regulations have legalized these types of practices, so much so that we are unable to provide a universal school meal program, or better pay farmers and migrant farm workers, or to provide living wages, or to end student debt? And to this issue, Islam teaches the following in the Holy Quran. Stand firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even though it be against yourselves or your parents or your kin, be he rich or poor, and follow not your low desires, that you may be able to act equitably. And if you hide the truth or evade it, then know that Allah is well aware of what you do. And in addition to the teachings of justice, I have also been inspired by Islam's insistence on seeking knowledge. In an oral narration, the Prophet actually was known to tell his followers to seek knowledge all the way to China. So seek knowledge even if you have to go as far as China. And remember, back then they didn't have airplanes. So that's being an international student, but like at a whole other level. Right? And so, and beyond that, also, he put scholarship on such a high pedestal that he said that the ink of a scholar is holier than the blood of a martyr. And that's because knowledge production and the dissemination of knowledge is seen as sacred work. And this is because scholarship and knowledge should be mobilized for peace and for healing. And while most scholars stop using ink, I know, well, not the printer ink, but every single time I type on my keyboard, I really think about that teaching. But then a scholar is nothing if they do not walk the talk. So to this, the first Caliph of Islam, Abu Bakr, taught that without knowledge, action is useless, and knowledge without action is futile.
So how beautiful is it that the foundation of evidence-based decision-making, knowledge mobilization, and community action were actually embedded in the true teachings of Islam? So here's another key insight and contribution to justice, because we see a lot of injustice in the world. Double standards in the legal system, oppressors, war criminals being celebrated, having entire holidays named after them, or streets and statues named after them. Individuals who have profited from people suffering and exploiting the environment, living in mansions, honored by society, viewed as philanthropists. But in Islam, these material successes and honors are temporary. And so I approach food justice knowing that even if the legal system of the society is currently stacked towards injustice, there will be accountability for all of our action. And so I coined the term soul print to help explain that just like there are eco or carbon footprint, and there's digital footprint or digital shadow to track what you do on the internet, and there are retina scans and face scans and DNA tests that can be used as an evidence, so do we have soul print, where a record of our actions are imprinted into our soul and absolute justice will not be evaded. So I hope that in situating myself and my worldview, by now you no longer feel that I'm a stranger, that I'm worthy of trust, and that you will feel comfortable sitting together with me to discuss about the field of food system planning, a field that I so deeply love that I almost want to jump up and down in the stage, but I'm not going to do that, embarrass Dr. Johnson and the team. And so food systems planners are emerging as a critical profession that should be integrated to all levels of government, but especially provincial, regional, and municipal government. And as a food system planner, my job, which is so exciting, is to integrate food system considerations into policy and plans and ensure that it is socially, economically, and ecologically just. Nice wallpaper, right? So here we are at the table together, and hopefully we have amazing scholars, students, health leaders, policymakers, I hope, in the room or or on Zoom, business leaders, and we are sitting at the table together, excited to strategize, to do better, to achieve food justice. But wait, hold on, we're not ready to start yet. Not everyone is here yet. And I hear a knock and open the door, and streaming in to join us are urban and rural farmers, refugee turned food entrepreneurs, binners, Indigenous community members and nations, clients of food banks, single parents, former youth in care, seniors, newcomers, and more. And the table becomes lively and vibrant. And this vibrancy and diversity of voices is exactly what we had in mind with the Our Home, Our Food, Our Resilience project, a SSHRC-funded New Frontiers grant, Photo Voice, Food Asset Study, in partnership with the UBC Forestry Lab and Kitselas First Nation Lands and Resources to identify important community food assets and food aspirations. And we conducted our study in Vancouver, the Alberni-Clayoquot region, and in Kitselas territory located in Terrace, BC. And one of the many objectives of this study, and trust me, there are many, is to contribute to food system resilience, which is defined as the capacity over time of a food system and its units at multiple levels to provide sufficient, appropriate, and accessible food for all. And also in the face of various and even unforeseen disturbances. As we will hopefully have learned from the pandemic and also the BC storm, creating food system resiliency plans, which currently does not exist for the province and most municipalities in BC, is very, very important. And food system resiliency plans are not meant to just deal with short-term emergencies, but also to ensure that in the long term, our food system is strong and not vulnerable to disruption. Strong food systems mean survival for all of us. But unfortunately, we are severely lacking in updated data on household food security here in BC. Food banks usually provide data of the number of clients they serve. And so there is some data there, but this is severely limited since not all people who are food insecure go to food banks. We do know, though, that even before the pandemic, according to the BC Center for Disease Control, that almost 12% of BC households were food insecure in 2016. And a study study of food bank users found that 62% of the participants who obtained food from food banks said that the food was not enough to meet their daily needs. And if we look at the municipal level, the data goes even deeper to show that Indigenous communities and Black communities are disproportionately impacted by food insecurity at 41% and 29% respectively. So clearly, this is not food justice. And so for our study, we applied citizen science research, which is a method that relies on non-scientists to collect data. And we use photography as it was accessible. And it also provides a tool to share perspectives in a more engaging way, to empower participants, to challenge stereotypes, and to hopefully provide context that can help policymakers better empathize and relate to diverse voices. So excited to share that here are the amazing scientists and amazing photographers from the Vancouver Photo Voice Food Asset Project. And here are the amazing citizen scientists from Alberni Cloyacot. So this case study was led by UBC's Forestry Lab, Dr. Janet Bulkin, and PhD student Megan Curtis. And here are the lovely citizen scientists from Kitselas First Nation in Terrace, BC. And this case study was done in partnership with Kitselas Land Use and Resources with the support of Dr. Chelsea Armstrong from SFU Indigenous Studies, managed by the lovely Tamara Soma and recently graduated planning student Samantha Jung. And these citizen scientists were asked to identify important food assets. Food assets include the local food infrastructure that maintains food secure communities and regions, farms, processing and distribution capacity, food enterprises, market, retailers, community gardens, urban farms, community kitchens, and so on and so on. But the thing is, with food assets is that it's usually mapped. And this is done to better support food system resiliency and identify important infrastructures. However, there is no consensus on what is meant by food assets, and food asset maps are highly dependent on process and who contributes to identifying said assets. And this is why it's important to ask and to say who gets a voice. And so what we found from scanning numerous food asset maps is that ecological assets, cultural assets, spiritual food assets, and Indigenous food assets are often missing. So in our study, we asked, how can a citizen science-led food asset mapping process better identify those hidden food assets and aspirations, which has thus far been overlooked? And how can the integration of photo voice in a citizen science-led food asset study support the development of a more just and equitable food policy? And so in Vancouver, we conducted community food asset mapping charrette. We also conducted photo voice training sessions, and all citizen scientists were paid an hourly living wage of 26.58 per hour to participate. They also approved the photos. We went through an iterative process to ensure that everyone is satisfied and happy with the final outcome. Okay, so now we're going to go back to my heroes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to structure the finding based on what my heroes have taught me about food justice. So my first food hero is the late Dr. Wayne Roberts. He was a master cross-pollinator. He passed away this January of 2021. He was always buzzing around, meeting people and offering his support. And he said, Tamara, instead of framing this issue as what are all of the things that you need to do for food, you should actually think about it the other way in terms of how can food help? How can investing in food justice actually improve social, economic, and our ecological systems? So from an ecological standpoint, in Lida Farm in Port Alberni, Jacqueline, Gary, and Louis Swan, they practice polyculture farming and use the principles of biodynamic agriculture. And so at their farm, they support the biodiversity of pollinators, including native pollinators, and they work very hard to nourish the soil. And growing food sustainably and using a regenerative approach helps support biodiversity, which will make our food system more resilient. And from a social and economic standpoint, food can also provide opportunities, especially for newcomers, and also strengthen community and bonding between diverse cultures. And so as Manjeet Thandi, a citizen scientist in Vancouver, noted in her photo, she just loved her experience learning with the group. I don't know if you've heard it, Flavors of Hope. And at that event, she learned about new recipes from different countries, made friends, and also purchased pre-prepared foods made by women newcomers and food entrepreneurs. So ecology, economy, and joy, not Dr. Johnson, but joy. These are only some of the ways that food can help. And so my second justice hero is my brother from another mother, Indigenous scholar, Dr. Aaron Mills from Kuchiching First Nation, and also he is a professor at McGill University. He was the one who taught me first the principles of all my relations. And he said that this principle did not just apply to humans, but that relations also include plant and animals. So think about it, even a cute little humble blueberry is our relations. And one of the best example of a spiritual food asset that exemplifies all my relation is the Sikh langar in the Gurdwara. It is amazing that so many of the citizen scientists in Vancouver that we work with, they've eaten at a langar even though they are not from the Sikh religion. So Surindra, our citizen scientist, noted that the langar always makes you feel welcome. You always feel that you belong. No matter if you're rich or poor, everybody is equal and everybody eats together. So a completely different worldview than the two-tiered food system that we have right now, and such a beautiful representation of all my relations. So I say thank you to Guru Nanak. And when it comes to animal relations, the story of the octopus from Darren is so important. It is about respect for animal relations. And so as Darren noted, and Darren is from Kitsalas First Nation, he was taught not to celebrate the death of the animals that they harvested, that the animals offered its life so that the community can be strong, so the relationship is based on respect and therefore only harvesting what is needed and protecting the habitat of our animal relations. And this goes the same with harvesting berries, only taking enough and making sure there are fruits for other animals too. The animals and plants take care of people, and we should return that by also caring for them. And my third food hero is Melanie Goodchild, former advisor to the Food Systems Lab and director of the Turtle Island Institute, who taught me that food is medicine. And so in Vancouver, we have amazing Leona Brown, who is an Indigenous food expert, and she speaks about the importance of investing in Indigenous focused spaces where she can share more about her knowledge of plants and also share or sell Indigenous medicines. And places like the Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Center Society are critical places of belonging, where communities can eat cultural foods, gather, and live by the teaching that food is medicine. And for fun-loving Debbie in Alberni, every plant has a purpose. And even those plants people might think are just weed. So they're more than just weed. As she said, the purple dead nettle have medicinal properties and can be eaten in salads and put in teas. And if you think about it, with the ubiquitousness of hyper-processed food, it just makes so much sense to transition to a food system where food heals both body and spirit instead of make people sick. Oh, this is a good one. So the next hero is a personal mentor and also an honorary advisor to our lab, Dr. Marie Wilson. And so Dr. Marie Wilson was one of the three Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner. And she always taught us from the beginning that our food work in Canada should always center the survivors at the heart of the story. And this is one way that our lab can contribute to Indigenous food sovereignty, food justice, and then the TRC calls to action, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. So here we have citizen scientists Marilyn and Matilda from Port Alberni, and they speak about the impact of residential schools in disconnecting communities from their knowledge, culture, food traditions, and spirituality. It was meant to break the culture. And colonial structure also created barriers that have impacted Indigenous food sovereignty. So in this photo, Marilyn and Matilda showcase traditional smoking and salmon preservation techniques and the importance of transmitting this knowledge to the younger generations and supporting these food preservation in infrastructure. So we need to invest in this. And for Desiree, her dad was hidden by her grandparents so as not to be taken to residential school. And this has allowed her family to continue to practice traditional food knowledge and also learn the language. She wants to make sure that others in her community have the opportunity to relearn these skills. In centering the story of the survivors, we are asking that policymakers invest in Indigenous food knowledge and education centers, in language preservation and reparations for harms done, because this is the just thing to do. And my next hero, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established the need to support food justice. He said that paradise and basically the evolution of the soul or the steep ascent can be achieved by freeing slaves, feeding the hungry, including our neighbors, the orphans, and those lying in the dust. And those whose souls have evolved are those who care about justice. I never thought coming from Indonesia that there would be so much poverty in Canada. And so we need to ask ourselves, how did we as a society make injustice acceptable? So here I want to share with you Elwood's photo. Elwood is a superstar and the funniest person ever. So he is a binner and is highly knowledgeable about the Vancouver scene. But his daily activities are filled with long lineups to get food and strategizing where to get food next. These lineups are not only hard on people, and especially those who are disabled or seniors. Often, Elwood told me that people would line up for hours only to be told that there's no more food left. And for Diana, an amazing poet and artist, she noted how the food from the food banks are not sufficient, and it does not provide enough wholesome food such as fruits and vegetables. So she took this photo and told us that this is a reminder that this is not an acceptable situation, that everyone deserves better. And it's not just about food quantity, but it's also about food quality and dignity. And finally, for the final hero, we have Belinda Lee. At the Food Systems Lab, we care deeply about conducting community-engaged research using ethical innovation and conducting food work that brings people together, that is healing, and that builds good relations. And so as the co-founder of the Food Systems Lab and director of innovation, Belinda is always there to make sure that innovations in research methodologies and prototypes or interventions are done in a just manner and benefits those who need it the most. So what we do is we do that by thinking outside of the typical research box. This means applying art, doing theater skits, using new tools, and finding unique ways to explain things in the food system, even if we have to mobilize Cookie Monster from Sesame Street to help explain systems thinking to the participants. But ethical innovation also means being open to values and practices that challenge the dominant assumption. And here I am, and well aware, and I'm sure most of us are, from reading the news or watching the movies, what the dominant assumptions are about Islam, about Muslims, about hijabis like me. And so I hope tonight that I have challenged that dominant assumption. And I hope that today I have shown that Islamic teachings can also contribute to supporting food justice as part of the other teachings. And yes, nature has a cure for everything. According to Islam, food is also medicine. And nature is medicine for people who reflect. And for that, we should be grateful and learn from the cute fuzzy bumblebees. And so here is a verse from the Quran honoring the teaching that food is medicine. And I'm going to leave you with this final quote from Sumelang, which is so beautiful. And I'm going to read it. The thing is, it's one, you know. Everything in the end connects into one. There's no compartment. It's all connected. It should be. Everybody's life should be that way. That's how we should meditate. So it's not only about food I'm talking about. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
I'm going to ask you to come and join me. And first of all, I just want to thank you ever so much for a fantastic talk. I want to thank you for situating yourself so beautifully. I think, you know, it is so important for us to talk about who we are and how who we are informs our research. So thank you for that. I thought that was fantastic. There are so many lessons, both from your heroes, but also from your work itself. And I'm going to this evening explore some of those by asking some questions myself. I'm going to remind those of you online and in the audience that you can also use Slido, and I'll start to watch some of the questions that come up. So you will have an opportunity there, but I get to start and ask some questions. So I want to begin with those very beginning images that you shared of the floods and this tragic situation that we find ourselves in. And you've talked about food resiliency. And I'm wondering if you can just help me think through. You talked also about food system resiliency plans. Just want to maybe unpack that a little bit more and talk about the connection between, like, I actually don't even know what a food system resiliency plan would look like. So maybe you could start there and then make a connection to the justice piece as well.
Perfect. And that's a great question, because I think, well, how does food system resiliency connect with food justice? And I think all of us can probably relate to the fact that when the panic buying or the hoarding started, one really needs to have a car, a deep chest freezer, and money to be able to hoard. And we in the lab work with many community members who can only access food through walking, through to getting on the bus, and also who work and they don't have regular stable income. And therefore, there is no way that they would be able to, stock up or hoard. They buy food in small amounts, or they rely on a supermarket, on food banks or charities. The thing that is really shocking in terms of food system resiliency and food justice is the fact that for such a long time, we are so reliant on that two-tier food system that I keep on talking about, where community members are reliant on surplus food for donation. And so when we see all of that images of just empty shelves, we think about, well, what do they have? What do they get? And so that's the first piece around food system resiliency and justice. Now, in terms of the food system resiliency plan, we don't have any. And I think that is so important for us to think about that, natural disasters, they're not going to stop magically. And the pandemic is also a warning for us. And so we need to come up with a food system resiliency plan, and how it looks like. Actually, other places have done it. So in Baltimore, Maryland, Johns Hopkins University has been working with stakeholders very deeply, identifying gaps and also assessing, where are the weak spots and where are their opportunities, and also interviewing stakeholders across the food system to ask them, well, are you prepared? Do you have a plan? And so here in British Columbia, we have some of the amazing schools in the province working on food and agriculture issues, and we need an interdisciplinary team to work together to come up with a food system resiliency plan that identifies assets, identifies needs, and also not only just prepare for short-term emergencies, like the communication piece to make sure that people don't panic, but also the long-term aspect of how, what kind of future of food do we want? So thinking about growing in cities, supporting vertical agriculture, seed saving, all of these other things that we need to do to make sure that our food system is resilient long-term as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another thing I want to follow up on is this notion of food as a commodity.
Yeah.
Do you think thinking about, it is a commodity, right? Like, so do you think, can we get away from that? And do you think that just this notion of food as a commodity is antithetical to food justice?
Yes, exactly. And so when I brought the food, so Dr. Aaron Mills is actually not a food researcher. He's an Indigenous legal scholar, and he was the one that taught me about all my relations, and that food is really a relations, because when you have a relationship, you're thinking about, well, how can I make sure that the ecosystem is functioning well for my relations? And it's not just a one-way approach of exploitation and just taking a food without giving back, but it's also thinking about what we can do, what are our responsibilities to our relations. And so many cultures have already have that balance, have that idea that food is not just a commodity, that food is actually a relations. And I think this is where I will say that it's so important to center Indigenous voices and learn from Indigenous teachers.
Yeah, because that really has been a notion, a central teaching.
Central teaching, yeah.
It's interesting. The other thing I was thinking about, and I want to go back to this two-tier system that we have right now that you've talked about. When food banks were established, I remember when they were first established, as we started to think about food insecurity decades ago, and it was supposed to be temporary.
Yes.
A temporary solution. And now I think all of us realize it feels like a very permanent solution in our lives. Do you think that I'm just kind of interested in this perpetuation and how we just continue to give food to the food bank and think about that. It just in some ways perpetuates this two-tier system, doesn't it? It gets us away from thinking about kind of broader system issues. I'm just wondering if you can help me think that through a bit more.
Yes, and so there's actually a lot of food bank staff and organizations that basically are calling out for the importance of, income-based solutions, and also saying that we really want to make ourselves go out of business because this, as you mentioned, it started out as an emergency or temporary solution, but now then the numbers of clients in food banks all across Canada have just increased and increased. And there was just a new paper out in the city of Toronto. It's in the hundreds of thousands. And so I think we need to look at other examples. So there's actually a municipality called Belo Horizonte in Brazil. And so they've actually enshrined, you probably heard of it, they've enshrined the right to food. So we keep on talking about the right to food, and they've actually enshrined the right to food in their governance model. And so the kind of solutions that they're thinking about are actually win-win solutions for the farmers, because what they do is they create public restaurants, people's restaurants. And so these are subsidized, and then they also purchase directly from local and small farmers. And they also make sure they procure food to provide school meals for children, and they create public markets so that people can go, and 20 to 25 of the key items are actually set so that anyone can go, and it's fresh, affordable food. And so, that's the kind of solutions that it's a business solution, and then it's a way that you can actually perpetuate it without having this stigma and dignity issue that we have with our current situation.
So that's a wonderful vision, isn't it? And I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a bit more in terms of where we might go in terms of a sustainable food system, a just sustainable food system. What's your big dream about what the system could look like?
Oh my goodness. That's a big question. I do have big dreams. I did, when I was little, wanted to be the president of Indonesia.
I still think that could happen. I'm just saying.
It actually can't, because I'm no longer a citizen. Okay. but I'm still dedicated to the world. And so what I will say is that when I think about, actually, we did a project with the Vancouver Economic Commission, and this is so exciting. My student, Jamie Lynn Barney, did a project, her MyTech Shirk internship was on the right to food approach to a circular food economy. And there's actually some people in the room that are advisors to this particular project. And so how can we think about closed loop systems, like closed loop cities, that also have justice and equity as the foundation? So we're not just replicating move the problem around and just, not looking at the root causes, but a right to food approach to a circular food economy is an alternative approach. And you should download the report online, check Google.
Okay, thank you so much. That's fantastic. I do know there are people in the room tonight, and I think online as well, who are really interested in pursuing some of this work themselves. And I'm just wondering, for those of us who might be interested in moving forward with this work, doing community engaged research, particularly around food work, et cetera, what advice would you give for people working in communities? I've met a few tonight, trying to do this work, move forward.
Absolutely. So as a scholar, I view my role as a public servant, to be honest. And that's also because community engaged research is a work of service. And so the first thing that one needs to do when doing community engaged research is to make sure that one is humble. And humility is the first ingredient that will allow someone to really open their mind to bringing in diverse worldview and diverse lived experience. And so what I would say is start with humility first. Listen and learn, and you will be a great community engaged scholar.
Okay, well, that's a very good, again, a very, very good lesson for all of us, I think, as we move forward. I'm wondering as well, I'm going to come to the questions online in a moment, so keep them coming. I'm wondering as well, you talked about, setting the table, bringing people together, and that was such a wonderful image then, about setting the table with all of us here, but also talking about who else is not here. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you can create spaces for this work. How do we do this so that not just metaphorically, but that I think we see it through your project, but what other advice would you give in terms of really making sure that those types of voices, those other voices are heard in the work that we're doing?
Yes, absolutely. I actually still feel surprised a lot of the times when I talk to researchers who would ask me to connect them with community organizations. And when I ask, do you have any plans for payment and all of that types of support? And they say no. Yeah. And that is that at this point in time, especially, it's never acceptable, but it is definitely unacceptable. And so actually with the research, so with this particular research grant, the Shark New Frontiers grant that funded our research, there are so many ways that researchers can actually build in a just livable wage within their research proposal. And that should be a priority if doing community engaged research. And I definitely recommend that to everyone.
Thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to let one question come from the audience tonight. I'm cueing Desiree right now, and Desiree is a student. I think it's always great to hear from our students. So I'm going to actually let Desiree ask a question this evening, and then I'm going to come to the questions online as well. So, and we'll see where we go. So Desiree, introduce yourself. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Desiree, and I'm a third-year student at SFU and also program assistant at SFU Public Square. Thank you so much for that enlightening lecture. So I find that a lot of the beliefs and values that we have around food systems were pretty much nurtured from childhood. And so, you know, what would you say to the younger generation, youth, students like me, you know, who would want to like get more involved, who want to be engaged and participate in food policy planning, as well as just redefining these wrong narratives, which you've highlighted today about food justice?
Oh my goodness, that is such a great question. And so I will just say I'm a mom of three. So working with youth, supporting youth food literacy is such a passion of mine. And in fact, we have a Shark Partnership Development Grant working with Public Health Association of BC and Farm to School BC. So food literacy, especially for youth, is definitely it's a passion. What I will say, so actually, I don't know if you know, probably you don't know this, my students do, many of them, is that I started getting into food work because my mom always told me, Tamara, eat every single grain of rice. If you don't finish it, the rice will cry. And ever since then, Mom, thank you. Which is, by the way, it's her birthday. Happy birthday. And so like I've always been passionate about food loss and food-based research. And so it actually has transformed me even now. So that's very key. And my advice to you is, you know, join the Youth Food Policy Council. At SFU, there's Embark Sustain. They do amazing work. Pablo does amazing work. And so definitely get involved. Meal Exchange is another great group to be involved in. And if you need research assistant position, Food Systems Lab, we're always hiring amazing students. So just give me a shout.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's great. That was fantastic. So let's get to some of the questions online here. So here's the first one that's been voted up. How can we put pressure on the government and institutions to enshrine the right to food here? So what kind of political action, what do you think we need to do here?
Yes, so there's this organization Canada-wide. It's called Food Secure Canada. And they've been doing a lot of amazing initiatives, coalition building of various food and farming organizations. And they've been doing this campaign called Eat, Think, Vote. I think that's the right campaign. And so it's really about sparking discussion and dialogue, and also getting the MPs or MPPs that are running, or city councilors that are running, to say like, oh, wow, there's actually a lot of people that care about food. I actually should put food into one of my campaign items or one of the policy that I would like to promote. So they've been doing a great job. And so I will say right now, we have also, Canada has a National Food Policy Council. So that is another hopeful trend that I hope will start getting the conversation and also the movement along to really enshrine the right to food. There's a lot of great people in the Food Policy Council in the national level.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. Let's go to another question. How does Indigenous land sovereignty, land back, and advocacy for land title connect to the strengths and weaknesses of a food resiliency plan? What's the risk when a plan is created in the current context of settler colonialism in Canada? This is no small question, I've got to tell you.
No,
right?
it's no small question, but it's a very important question. And I think, so as a planner, I'm very much, I actually just work with my student, taught a module on Indigenous planning. And what is key is to really recognize that Indigenous nations are right holders and not just regular stakeholders. They actually have an important role in not only co-governance, co-management, to have the sovereignty to decide what goes on in their territory. And what actually Dr. Chelsea Armstrong did a great study at SFU to show that in fact indigenous peoples and the way that they have planted food, forest garden shows that there's so much knowledge that can be provided for food system resiliency. And these are the type of knowledge and expertise that can really help us survive. So I really actually see this as an opportunity for us to be able to live more sustainably, equitably, and justly. So it's great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great, that connectivity.
Mhm.
What are your key recommendations for Canada's emerging national food policy agenda? So you've talked a little bit about that, but let's go a bit further. You did talk about the National Food Policy Council.
Mhm.
So obviously there is work afoot around the policy agenda. So it has a focus on food waste, food security. So what's your recommendations on where Canada should go in relation to food policy?
Well, I think justice. It has to be just. And so I think the one thing about that question that is so interesting is often when we address issues around food waste and food insecurity, we talk about it as a linear issue, as in to avoid food waste, just make sure that you provide the food and then just redistribute it to community members to address their food insecurity. And by doing that, we're not actually addressing the deep-rooted issues, the causes. And so I think what we need to do in terms of policy moving forward is not only to think it from a systems perspective, think about externalities, potential unintended consequences, and layer that justice, because without which it will just keep on perpetuating band-aid solutions.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Well, I think we've already heard you tonight around that thematic around justice and how important that is, right?
That's the theme.
That is the theme. We've got that
Absolutely.
message. That's fantastic. So here's another question from Jordan. What are some ideal methods for engaging those most targeted by food insecurity in research when some community members distrust researchers outside of their own communities due to historical exploitation? I mean, that's always an issue, isn't it, to try and find that trust?
Absolutely, and it's their right as well. And so in community-based led research, you don't move forward until you are given the permission to, until you are trusted enough that the community will welcome you and open their arms. And I think sometimes, to be honest, the reason why I love community engaged research so much is because it's actually a great way to keep researchers accountable. Yeah. It is a really great way to keep researchers accountable, because we have many examples of when that does not happen. And so for us in our work, we do a lot of listening. We do a lot of adapting and modifying to suit the context of particular communities. And also we take the time to build trust. So I know sometimes in research there are timelines and you need to get deliverables done, but thankfully SSHRC has an extension process. So we can say, hi SSHRC, we need a 1-year extension. And usually they give it and it's no problem. And so yeah, of course, try to do it before you do the proposal. Always make sure that you ask permission to include the community in the proposal, because sometimes that has happened as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think the other piece about community engaged research around this accountability that's so interesting is that the findings have to go. It's an assumption, isn't it, that the findings will go back and need to be useful to the community itself. And so I think historically researchers have, there has been a historic tradition of researchers taking knowledge and out of communities and not providing benefit back, but that kind of reciprocity is built in.
Absolutely. And the one thing I think why I love the move at SFU and also the theme of community engaged research at SFU is because I feel that I'm actually encouraged to work with communities in creative ways, such as doing the photo books. These are not traditional academic publication. Yes, we'll get the academic publication done since I'm not tenured yet, but I think we are supported. We are supported to do galleries and to make sure that the communities are involved in a visual and artistic way, because I don't think the journal articles will always work for all communities. And I feel this is why it's great.
Yeah, I think we're all learning that journal articles that sit in libraries that no one reads really isn't going to make the impact that we really want. And obviously we want to think about this mobilization that you've talked about so powerfully tonight. That's fantastic. So here's a question. It's very specific. I like this question because it's about the accountabilities that we all can have And this is how can I engage this issue in my neighborhood? What can I do to engage this issue at the systems level? So, you know, there's a lot of people here online and in the audience tonight. Like, what's our call to action here? What do we need to do?
Oh my goodness, all around the Lower Mainland and even more, there are so many great food organizations. There in Burnaby, there's the Burnaby Neighborhood House and Burnaby Food First. In Vancouver, there's the Vancouver Food Policy Council. There are so many ways that we can have a voice. And the one thing why I don't prefer the term consumers is because it takes a lot of agency out. And when we think of ourselves as citizen eaters, and that's not, I didn't come up with that. Another academic did, but somehow I can't think of the name. Anyhow, we really need to think about that agency piece, and a lot of us can contribute through local work and local organization, and I certainly am. And so I hope that Stephen can find out what food organization is working in his community or their community and participate.
Yeah, so start local and
then go global.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. So here's Jack Farrell thanking you for your presentation, but also asking what agents or institutions, domestic or global, represent the main barriers to establishing food justice. Where to begin?
Okay, so I think Jack is really trying to kind of nudge me to talk about the unjust international trade system. And so at the Food Systems Lab, we work with amazing farmers here in BC, and many of them discuss how they face challenges when trying to grow local food, and they face challenges in trying to compete with food prices from elsewhere when they are, they have higher costs of food production, the land is more expensive, the labor is more expensive, and so therefore they can't compete. And so that is the piece around why we need food sovereignty, which is the ability to choose what type of agriculture system we want to promote. And that's not always possible when we have the pressure from the international kind of trade injustice. And so that's an issue that we need to discuss. It's not my particular expertise. There are other scholars like Dr. Jennifer Clapp who works on this issue, but Jack knows what's going on. We need to address this issue for sure.
Right. So it's mostly the trade issues, you would say.
There are definitely trade issues.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting just going to many of the chain grocery stores. It's hard to even purchase local food, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So here's a question. I'm very interested in this one. It's from Anonymous, but I think it's a really good question, and that's what can SFU do to more actively embed equity into its food systems on campus? So we have 3 campuses, downtown, Burnaby Mountain, Surrey. And food insecurity is an issue for some of our students, obviously, but it's also something we should be thinking about. We are a bit of a microcosm. So what advice would you give?
So Anonymous, I love this question. Actually, we've been working very hard. The Office of Sustainability Office led by Candice Leroy, and we've been working as a joint partnership with other universities, BCIT, UNBC, and us, and also Vancouver Island University, to think about embedding justice. And so we actually have, we've engaged with students. We did multiple events, including a competition of a student-led food initiative on campus. And so that's just the first level. We just want to get the conversation going. I think SFU will be a powerhouse in food and contribute to all of the other great works that the other universities are doing. So I'm excited about the potential.
Yeah. I know we have already made some commitments around procurement to try and procure local food into our cafeteria systems. And I think even that kind of commitment locally into the economy, and going back to that earlier question, I think is an important thing for us to be thinking about.
Yes, and a lot of students are very interested in doing land-based learning and doing growing work. And so Embark Sustain has done a lot of work in this. And I think that they're an organization that definitely deserves more support so that we can, do a lot more programming and workshops and all of that good stuff.
That's fantastic. That's great. At the food justice table today in BC, who should be invited in this important topic discussion to bring the planning into actions? Can you name the best people today who should be invited to the BC table? No pressure now.
Oh my goodness, that's like being told to announce who you're going to invite to your wedding, and then how dare you? Why did you not invite me?
Yeah, a lot of pressure here.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
We'll keep it in the room here today.
Yeah. I think it's stream live. And so my goodness, there are so many amazing people. But what I will just say to keep it more general, is that it's not just academics' voice. I think it's important to include the practitioners. Like I mentioned the example of Leona Brown, who is just such an amazing Indigenous food knowledge keeper and expert. And there are many, many more like her. And I think it's also important, depending on where we are working and situating ourselves, to work with the host nations, make sure that that the plan and the work is appropriate and is something that they would be happy to support.
Yeah, that's great. Here's another question. What's the Muslim perspective on the circular economy of food? There's a very interesting philosophical question for you. Yeah.
Yes. So the Muslim perspective, and I can't remember the entire verse of the Quran because I'm not that kind of scholar. But what I will say, actually, Islam is very much focused on prevention. So addressing the root cause. So there's this verse in the Quran. I don't remember the chapter, but someone will probably know and put it in the chat, where basically when we are harvesting, that there is a right in that harvest for people and for communities. And so it starts at the farm. It starts at not wasting at the farm. And so that piece is so key to prevention of food loss and waste to begin with. And so there is a right for people in that food that is being harvested. And then the number 2 piece is that there's a mention in that particular verse of eating seasonally. And so that is key, because the problem is right now, part of the international unjust trade is that we very much in Canada rely on other countries to really exploit their resources and their water to produce all the different types of food that we want. And that is not just. And so eating and supporting seasonal food and place-based food is really critical to actually shorten the food supply chain and not have it be so complex and so long.
We've got to give up strawberries in December, don't we?
I think so. It doesn't taste that good anyway.
I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. You know, it's interesting in terms of that last question, and you've done this so beautifully today, to talk about, Islam and its perspective on food justice and how it informs your work. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how different worldviews could actually help inform this kind of work and why that's important for us.
Yeah, and it actually goes back to not only my faith, but also my culture of diversity amid unity in diversity, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. And so I just think back about the experience of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who had that lived experience. He was an orphan and he almost always went hungry. And so he came to a lot of his teachings also from personal experience. And so lived experience is so important. And I find that it's very problematic when academics talk for others. And I find that as a Muslim, it's often the case that other people speak for me. Other people put things, and I'm like, that's not Islam. And so I think I'm so grateful to have this platform and this privilege to speak with people in person and in Zoom to hopefully shine a different light, on what Islam really has to say, and hopefully more community members and people would love to work with us at the Food Systems Lab.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think the other thing that really strikes me is that you were also talking even about kind of Indigenous ways of knowing and how like these different world perspectives help us see food in different ways, help us understand justice in different ways. You know?
Yes. And so the one thing I will just say, there's this, I use the term cultural genius, because there's one verse in the Quran that says that God made us into different races and tribes and nations so we can get to know one another. And the best thing I love is getting to know one another with food. And so that's kind of my philosophy, is that we're supposed to get to know one another, learn from one another, and learn from each other's cultural genius. And I've been just very privileged to learn from many Indigenous teachers.
Yeah, cultural genius of food. I love that. That's fantastic. Here's another question from Visanto. What do you think of government subsidizing production of beef, pork, slaughterhouses when these are probable and convincing carcinogens and linked to our other major chronic diseases while we have socialized medicine? Could the money be better used?
I think that money should never be used to exploit animals. And so that's where the type of factory farming is not sustainable in the long term, and it creates a lot of pollution and it creates a lot of harm. It's very linear, it's not circular at all. And so when I think of animal as relations, I think back about the story that Darren shared, which is based on reciprocity and respect. and only taking as much as you need. And what we do know, because I work in the food loss and food waste field, is that there's a lot of waste.
Yeah.
We see all these headless salmon, headless chicken. Where did their heads go? Where did their legs go? So I come from a background where, you know, when we used to eat meat, it would be, we could see the whole animal. Sometimes we would take care of the animals, you know, we would actually raise them. And so that's a different way of relating, because you can only eat so you know, there's actually limits, right? So maybe it's a special type of event instead of like overconsumption. And so yeah, that's what I would say.
That's great. That's good. Top 3 food justice strategies that could best support a renewed food system. Come on, top 3. You can do it.
Like, and then like, yes, we have to look at the time too, because now I'm like, my brain is thinking, what are the top 3? Well, the first thing that I would say is just, you know, when we think about systemic and structural inequalities, we really need to think about who should be speaking more, who should have the platform more. And so that's a big piece about thinking about who should be at the table and who should have a voice. That's number 1. And then of course, also, I actually, there's the picture I showed about tax evasion and wealth disparity. A lot of great things that we want to do in food, that we can do in food, like universal children and school meals, and all of these other things, you know, we can do with better funding, but we can't do it when money is being shipped off somewhere else and when corporations are not paying proper taxes. So it has to start with the broader economy of making sure that the wealthy pay taxes so we can actually fund social programs, and that's very, very important. And then the third one, I think we just should learn from one another. I really think that's so important, and really kind of think about who are the experts. I'm here today, but I definitely think that many of the citizen scientists are have much more expertise, especially when it comes to survival. I would be knocking at their door and be learning from them instead of the other way around.
Well, I'm curious, what made you decide to follow this area? What was you know, there's so many areas one potentially could study and be a professor of, etc. What made you choose this area?
So beyond loving food.
Yeah, okay, loving food is important. Yeah.
While growing up in Indonesia, I saw a lot of prime agriculture farmland being paved over for mall developments, urban development, farmers basically going to urban centers without land, without any income, living in very unjust situation. And that really motivated me to do something about it, because when I actually first went to Canada and I watched this documentary called Life is Dead, I realized that what is happening in Indonesia is actually happening in many other parts of the world. And so I realized that it's a pattern, it's a global pattern. And so there are systems that are like tentacles that are creating these global patterns of inequality and injustice. And I want to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. I'm always really interested in, you know, where people's passions come from. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to ask one more question here, and then I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions tonight. Just thought I'd warn everybody about that. What role do household and community urban gardens play in empowering people to create sustainable food systems?
Okay, so I actually did a talk on 6 steps we can do to prevent and avoid a food apocalypse. And I know it sounds bleak, but please, we need to work together, because we really do not want to have a war to happen to then start saying like, oh, we need to start growing in our backyards. We need to start you know, supporting urban agriculture or backyard chickens or all of these other things, or seed saving. Let us not wait until that big moment. Let us hope that that doesn't happen. And so I think there's so many ways, and planning plays a role, because I know, for example, that just 20 minutes away, Vancouver has policies that allow for, you know, backyard chickens, whereas Burnaby does not. And so I think there are many ways that we can look at what are some of the barriers that are hindering food security initiatives from happening, and let's tackle those barriers and make it more accessible.
That's fantastic. You know, I really this evening in particular loved some of the images that you shared. The photo voice project is obviously very, very powerful. And I do understand that there's going to be a display of this photography at Science World. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I'm excited about journal articles being published too, but this one I'm super excited. And I really want to thank Science World. Science World is amazing because again, they're showing that science is not just one-sided. Science, STEM is important. And along with that, they're supporting social science and social justice work as well. And so it's going to be launched very, very soon. I don't have the exact dates yet. The exhibit is being put together. If you follow me on Twitter at Tamara with 2 M's like M&M, Soma, Tamara Soma, then you will know because I will be plastering it every single day on Twitter.
That's great. We will look forward, won't we, to seeing that display at Science World, and we'll continue the conversation. I mean, I've just enjoyed this so much. You have such energy, I have to say. It makes me so proud to be the president of SFU when I hear scholars like you making a difference in our world. I mean, that really is so impactful. So I really just want to thank you ever so much for your passion, for the great research that you're doing, but your thoughtfulness as well. I really deeply, deeply appreciate you spending time with us this evening. So please join me in thanking Professor Soma. Now, I have a few other, before we all sign off for this evening, I just want to say, wasn't that great? I think we had up to 160 people online with us as well at one point. So that was fantastic. So you had a big audience here tonight, both in the room and on Zoom. So thanks everyone for joining us. And I do want to thank a few other people as well. So just bear with me. I want to thank AI Media for doing the captioning for us this evening. They did a great job. I was checking it out a little bit, and that's really important for our accessibility. I want to thank SFU Woodward's technical team again for helping us broadcast this evening from the World Arts Center, and the SFU Public Square for their outstanding event organization. They always make us look good, as I said, and sound good as well. And for bringing us all together. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to engage with each other and to talk and to connect. So thank you very, very much. So stay tuned. We've got another lecture coming up, and it's going to be on January 25th. And it's going to feature Dr. Taco Niet, who is an assistant professor of professional practice in the School of Sustainable Energy Engineering. And Taco's going to discuss just climate policies, modeling for evidence-based decision-making. So the justice train continues, everybody. Come on back. We look forward to engaging with you and learning more about what we can all do together. So thank you ever so much.